moving on to Bostrom's argument, just real quick for those who are not familiar, Bostrom has an argument. He doesn't propose the simulation hypothesis himself, but he gives this argument where there's three premises, the third of which is the hypothesis that you're living in a computer simulation. The first is humans will go extinct before they're technologically capable of making a computer simulation with digital conscious beings. The second one is humans won't go extinct before that, but maybe they don't create conscious digital beings for some moral reason, like it's immoral to do so, or whatever the case is. Or three, that we are almost certainly living in a computer simulation. And he says, I think he says these are mutually exclusive, so and jointly exhaustive. So like one of these three is true. And if you don't have a reason to affirm one, you think that yes, we will eventually be technologically advanced enough to create conscious simulated beings. Unless you can affirm that, or if you can affirm, unless you can affirm two, that we won't do so, which seems kind of improbable. It seems like there's going to be an arms race, and they will make a bunch of these. Then three, you're already living in one. Dr. Huemer, have you been able? Have you looked over Bostrom's argument at all?
Yes. So it's been a while, but I basically know what the argument is. So one of my problems with the argument, my biggest problem or the most fundamental problem, is that I don't think that a computer simulation would be conscious. So like if like somebody ran a simulation of you, I don't think it would be conscious in the way that you are, even if it was a really great simulation. So
there's an objection that someone who's come on the podcast, Dr. James Anderson, has given, and he just brings it up. It's basically Searle's Chinese room argument that there's no such, you can't have a digitally conscious being because there's something important and that you can't replicate. So machine functionalism is out for one reason or the other. Is that what you're getting at here, Dr. Huemer?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a presupposition of the simulation argument that if you made a simulation, then there would actually be conscious beings in it.
Yeah.
The simulated beings would actually be conscious. And yeah, I am basically persuaded by things like the Chinese room argument, right? Which I heard directly from Searle when I was at UC Berkeley, when I was an undergraduate. And that was like the first really persuasive philosophical argument that I heard, I think, where like I was not sure the answer to the question beforehand. And then I heard the argument and I thought, wow, okay. Like I thought that totally settles it. And then later, to my great disappointment, I learned that most philosophers disagree with the argument.
Yeah.
Most experts in the field, in fact, like philosophers of mind, just completely reject it. Right. And then, I was very sad by that.
Well, so last time you were on, we talked about how Barry Stroud was your epistemology professor. Now I hear that you're hearing this Chinese room argument from Searle. It's insane. All the people that you've had, you better be as good as you are, I guess. But
actually, after undergraduate, then I went to Rutgers and I had a class with Jerry Fodor.
Oh, wow.
So I got to hear Fodor's response to Searle, directly from him.
Did you? I mean, you say you still like the conclusion, or you still are persuaded by the argument? So Fodor didn't move you at all?
No, not much.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of thought that he had the best response to it that I'd heard, but I still wasn't persuaded. And it was something like, well, okay, so you've got this functionalist account of consciousness where in order to be conscious, you have to have a certain pattern of causal relations among your internal states and also your behavior and external stimuli and all that. But in philosophy, there are a lot of causal accounts of different things. Mm-hmm. And whenever there's a causal theory of something, there's a deviant causal chain objection. Right. So so this is an example. What is it to break a glass? Well, it's to perform an action that causes the glass to be broken.
Right.
And then there's a deviant causal chain counterexample, which is like, well, what if I tell you to drop the glass on the floor? So that causes the glass to be broken, right? But I didn't break the glass. Mm-hmm. You broke the glass, right? So anyway, okay. And so Fodor thought, yeah, so if you have a functionalist view of mental states, there's also like this deviant causal chain problem. And, one way of having a deviant causal chain is having another conscious being, responsible for the causal links.
Uh-huh.
Right? And so like that's virtually always a deviant causal chain. We don't have a good analysis of what a deviant causal chain is, but we know that like that generally counts.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make you think that causal analyses in general are wrong, right? Like in order to break a glass, you do have to cause it to be broken. It's got something to do with that, right? It is causing it to be broken in a certain way, but it's really hard to say the exact way. But it excludes doing it by means of, causing somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
Right. And so Fodor's response was like, oh, the guy in the Chinese room, that's just a deviant causal chain, right? Like there are the causal relations that you're supposed to have, but they're not going by the right kind of causal chain.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't know that I find that very satisfying either, because that the Chinese room is just the CPU in a computer, right? That was the direct analogy there. So in a computer, there is no conscious being in the manipulation of the symbols, right?
No, yeah. So like Fodor's view is, in a normal real computer, it would be conscious. But in the Searle version, where there's a man in the room,
gotcha. That's the disanalogy.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Do you know, just offhand, does this only apply to a computer with the right amount of complexity, or does Fodor think that like this computer that I'm looking at right now has a degree of consciousness?
Oh, I'm not sure. I would guess that he would say not, because it's not complex enough.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So then, in looking at Bostrom's argument, then you would say you just affirm premise one that this is not going to happen, because I have a hard time actually with this. If you affirm premise one, it kind of seems like you're affirming that if humanity didn't go extinct by a certain time, then they would have accomplished the scientific sophistication which could give rise to this. So how do you go about rejecting this argument? Did you say that there's a suppressed premise, or there's an extra premise? These aren't actually jointly exhaustive. There's another premise, and that is that machine functionalism is false.
Yeah, actually, I think that's the thing that Bostrom assumes, but doesn't discuss separately, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, he doesn't discuss the idea that a sufficiently good simulation is actually conscious.
Yeah.
And I think that's because he's so confident of that, right? Like
he says that in the paper. Yeah, he just goes, well, most philosophers of mind are machine functionalists, so this is fine.
Yeah. So the other stuff he thinks is more controversial, which is kind of striking, but it's not unfair of him, because that's true about the state of the field, right?
Yeah.
It's just that I'm idiosyncratic. Anyway, so yeah, but I mean, the rest of the stages in the reasoning, I'm not really sure of. So like, I'm not sure that that humanity is not going to go extinct pretty soon.
Yeah.
Anyway, if we don't go extinct, I'm also not sure that, we're going to run a bunch of simulations of our ancestors or whatever. If we're going to run a bunch of simulations, why would you sort of waste time programming like boring things like this?
Like this podcast, this is an exciting podcast, Dr. Huemer.
If you're going to make, this is the exciting part of it. But
okay.
That was like his subtle dig.
Yeah, just chopping at me. Yeah,
it goes back to the mundane, boring stuff. Anyway, so if you were going to create a whole bunch of simulations, wouldn't almost all of them be something interesting or very enjoyable or very beautiful or very illuminating or something like that, right? Like something that would be good for some useful purpose, right?
Yeah. Well, so this is where the popular level intellectuals like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Elon Musk will say something like, and the philosophers don't do this, but the other folks do, and they'll say, well, look at the 2016 election. I mean, obviously Donald Trump was not supposed to win, so the simulators thought, hey, how crazy would it be if we make Donald Trump win in the simulation? So they'll point to crazy things like that, or the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand or something like that, and say, look, this is clearly where the simulators made the simulated world more interesting or something like that. What do you make? Is it just sheer speculation? You just go, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, you would expect some interesting things to happen in a real world, right? But in a world that was programmed by intelligent beings, you'd expect more interesting things to happen. So okay, Donald Trump winning, that was pretty interesting. It was, pretty entertaining there. But like, it could have turned out that during his inauguration speech, like he peeled off his face and there's like, an octopus head there or something, and with lots of tentacles.
Right. That's like if the Simpsons were programming the simulated world, for sure. I think that is an episode of The Simpsons, actually.
Right.
Okay.
And it's sort of like there's all this stuff that you could easily do if it was a simulation, but that wouldn't happen if it was the real world.
Yeah.
Like there's a much wider range of interesting stuff if it is a simulation.
Okay. So let's say machine functionalism is a viable option. There's this other philosopher, Metcalfe, who kind of further bolsters the indifference principle at play in this argument. And basically,
is this Tom Metcalfe?
Yeah.
Okay, he's a former student from Boulder. So.
Oh, no way! All right, that's fantastic.
Glad that he's doing stuff.
That's hilarious. You've got a connection to everyone on Earth in philosophy. So
I mean, this suggests that you just have similar tastes to me or something.
Yeah, that could be. Well, yeah, that's probably true.
Compare the theories, Parker. Either Huemer knows everyone in the world, or similar.
That's true. That could be true. Well, okay, so he gives this indifference principle, and this is going to be interesting because if he's wrong, then maybe he could blame his teacher, and if he's right, then his teacher is wrong. He's got this indifference principle, and he says, look, given the possibility of nested simulation, that within the simulation they're making other simulations. It's Dwight Schrute makes Second Life in The Office, all the way down. There's the majority of beings in the universe are going to be digitally conscious beings and not base reality beings that we take ourselves to be. If that's the case, then given this principle of indifference, you should think that you are a digitally conscious being, not a base reality being. What do you, insofar as I've represented the indifference principle accurately, what do you make of that? Is that right? Is that a right use of the indifference principle?
Yeah, I guess. So I think the conditional probability claim is correct, right? So if you accept that the majority of conscious beings, like conditional on the assumption that the majority of conscious beings are simulated, you're probably simulated.
Okay.
Right. But I don't know if you can get to that. I mean, you were saying very early in this discussion that you wanted to make this argument that there's something self-defeating, right?
Yeah.
And this is a point where this comes in, right? Because I don't know how you estimate the proportion of beings who are simulated if you don't get to use your information about the external world.
Yes.
It depends on thinking that you're correctly perceiving the external world.
Right.
Okay, now I don't know what the correct way of doing it is, but I think you can't just like assume, right? Like assume that everything is the way that it appears and reason about how the world is, and then get to the conclusion that everything isn't the way it appears.
Right. It seems like at some point you're Wittgenstein kicking away the ladder.
Right. And Wittgenstein thought that was fine, but what if you kick away the ladder and then you fall down?
Right. That's kind of, yeah, you've kicked away you've sawed off the branch which you've used to climb up onto the claim in the first place.
That you were sitting on.
There you go. Yeah, we're mixing metaphors here.